what your background is. You're Afghan.
Yeah.
Your parents immigrated when?
In 1982, right before I was born. We were like very traditional, only spoke daddy at home, didn't speak English generally because my parents said you're going to learn it no matter what, wherever you go and, you know, in school. Very traditional, hung out with only cousins, was not allowed to like really socialize outside of school or like hang out or date. Definitely dating was not allowed. And then growing up, I never had a coming out process. Like I think I was like 13, 14 when I first was like, oh, I like girls. I have no interest in men generally. I had no interest. And in my head I was like, this is awesome. Like I don't have to worry about coming out, telling my parents anything because I'm not allowed to have a boyfriend anyway. So nothing about this is suspicious at all. And then, you know, then as I got a little bit older, I think I thought I have to tell my parents that I'm gay, or because during college I was out and about, you know, I was happy dating, I was in a long-term relationship, but it wasn't the fact that I was in a relationship with a woman that I felt inclined to tell my parents. It was because I wasn't moving back home, and my parents just didn't understand why I wasn't coming back home after I graduated college. I sent them a letter at 22.
What would you say?
I said everything from, I told them like the job I had, I worked for Planned Parenthood, I was a sex educator, so I was afraid to even speak those words to them. So I told them like I'm like really good at my job, you know, I'm like really great with my students, that I have an apartment, that I even told them like how much money I made, because I didn't even tell them like, they had no idea what I was doing with my life. I was like kept them very much in the dark. I would come home on weekends, but we just wouldn't talk about anything other than, you know,
and how'd they take it,
together.
all that information?
My dad received the letter, and then he, one weekend when I was visiting, like told me to go with him to buy groceries, and we were in the car and he confronted me and said like, I got the letter, I'm not showing it to your mom, like, and just so you know, there's no such thing as like gay or lesbian Afghans, there's no such thing, and if you want to come out and if you think you're gay, just know that I'll never be buried in Afghanistan. In fact, they'll piss and shit in my coffin. Genuinely was afraid that I would lead this like terrible life of struggle. You know, like my father remembers losing his brother. He just went missing one day while they were still in Afghanistan. And to this day we have no idea where he went. But it was probably because he was very much active against like the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan that he just went missing. So for him, like he has, you know, he equates like being radical and political and going against the grain as it is life-threatening. So, thanks, Leo. Well, I mean, I'm a sex educator, but I'm a sexuality educator because it's work that needs to be done. And it's completely liberating for me to do it, to work on my own sexual self-determination.
How do you define your performance
work? Coming out
work?
Muslim is educational theater. You know, it's first and foremost meant to be educational and break down stereotypes and misconceptions around Islamophobia. Specifically, misconceptions around Islamophobia within my progressive, well-meaning queer community. And it's also meant to break down homophobia within my like queer South Asian immigrant kind of community.
What is the biggest misconception about being Islamic and queer?
I think the biggest misconception is that that being queer and Muslim are incompatible, right? So there's this like whole conversation about like people began to understand or learn or be present to Islam in a post 9/11 kind of setting, and even the most conservative folks who were like maybe anti-Islam and just like xenophobic and racist were like speaking things about Islam that even like well-meaning, self-identified, non-racist people were able to relate to, like this idea of like these cultures don't like women, they oppress their people, and especially gays. And so I think the biggest misconception is that there's an incompatibility with being queer and Muslim. I never felt like I needed a Quranic explanation of it being okay to be queer, because I always felt like for me, like my sexual orientation came from God, so I don't need any other explanation. But the Quran does have places in it where we can interpret, and in more modern times interpret the Quran to have kind of flexibility to say it's okay to be queer, it's okay to be gay. So this is from Surah Al-Nur, that is a section that tells women when they should be kind of more mindful of their chastity and when to cover up. They can not be covered in front of these folks, or their women folk, or those whom they rightfully possess, and here, or such male attendants as are beyond all sexual desire. So there's like acknowledging that there are women, there are men who may not have desire.
So you felt like you were reading along and you came across that and you're like, oh, wait a second, this interpretation could be...
Yeah. And this actually was an interpretation that somebody I recently met who truly needed and wanted Quranic affirmation of his sexual orientation. He found it in this section, which al-Nud, to me, like, nude is like one of my favorite words because it has to do with, like...
I mean light?
Yeah, light. Nude, like divine
Nude.
light.
Yeah. What makes you God-fearing?
Sometimes, in my most, like, vulnerable moments, it's, like, naturally where I go. It's, like, the most instinctual place that I turn to.
Have you always felt that way? Or has your notion of God changed over your...
I think for a while I internalized a lot of stuff about, like, even from, like, alcohol to drinking to, like, well, if I'm not praying, am I not being a good Muslim? You know, like, the judgments that I would get, you know, from some, like, my mom even, or from other Muslims, like, especially other, like, young Muslims, which is just so interesting. Just a lot of their, like, own projecting of things. And I think judged myself, put myself through that kind of, like, hated, like, internalized hate stuff. And then I was like, wait, I know myself to be this generally good person who wants to do good work. And my commitment to social justice is because I just want to do the good work that I think God would want. Like, that's the world I would want to live in.
How do you envision Allah?
I don't.
So how do you envision when you pray to this divine power? In what form does it take for you?
In the form of just words. In the form of words, like that my words will go up somewhere or around.
What's going in there?
If folks are interested in connecting with other queer Muslims or us at Coming Out Muslim, you can check comingoutmuslim.com. And at the very top, there's a tab that says Community Connections, and you can kind of check out some blogs and other LGBTQ and Muslim affirming spaces.
Salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam.